Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders for coders about all aspects of creating your best life as a developer.
I'm Will, the accomplished developer and aspiring software architect.
And I'm Beej, the journeyman developer sharing my journey in development. Do you ever get frustrated when trying to make a presentation or convince your team at work about a certain way to do something, but you keep getting derailed by irrelevant questions, irrelevant points? You may be facing attacks from someone who is using logical fallacies in their arguments. In this episode, we're going to discuss fallacies in formal logic, specifically fallacies of relevance. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
Well, I've been fighting a fallacy of relevance, actually. And that would be the Windows operating system. It's a giant pile of crap. My personal machine crashed 7 times between 4:30 yesterday afternoon and 9:30 last night. It's been just randomly blue screening since this latest update. I've had all kinds of stuff fail. I've had it just, you're playing a game and it just exits a game.
Yeah.
And you're back on the desktop. Yeah. So a lot of stuff is really, really going wrong. I am very highly prioritizing getting away from Windows entirely this year. It's like, look, everything else is messed up due to COVID anyway. Now's a good time to do that. And just, along with that, switching stacks and switching over to Node because, C# is a second class citizen on all these other platforms. And, with all the TypeScript stuff I've been looking at, it's like, dude, I'm running to something and I'm running away from something. And so I'm really trying to work that out. Our recording on this recording box, which is an Ubuntu Studio box, worked great last week, other than some physical discomfort because the desk layout is not optimal. Yes, it's working great. I did have one issue where it locked up, and I'm not sure what happened there. That was after we got done recording, and we were shutting off like audio streams and that kind of stuff, and then it locked up. So it was something strange, but it's been rock solid. So yeah, I'm looking at it going, you know what? Now's a really good time to just switch off of Windows. I feel like treating it like a professional workstation environment is sort of like treating a really strong laxative like it's cough syrup. It might fix your problem, but that's incidental and it's probably just going to make a mess. And that's where I am now. It's top priority to get rid of this problem forever.
Cool.
How about you?
Well, I attended Codeland Distributed last week. I don't know if you guys know this, but Code Newbie got bought out by Dev. And so they did a combined conference for Codeland this year. And since the COVID stuff is going on and we're not able to get together for conferences, they did it all online, which meant my talk, or well, actually it was a workshop that I submitted this year, didn't get picked because it was actually physical and you had to be there in person to go with it. So, but I still attended. It was really cool. The first day was free. It was basically just a 12-hour live stream of talks and panels. And that was kind of cool because it's gone global. So people were watching from all over the world. The second day, in my opinion, was better because it was workshops using Zoom. So that was really cool. I learned a lot of information during the 2 workshops I attended. And it was nice because the speakers stayed after in the Zoom chat and talked to the people who wanted to talk. So that was really cool. Took Monday off for a couple of doctor's appointments because I had another conference that church-related conference I'm attending today and tomorrow. What's really cool is tomorrow's keynote is John Maxwell, who wrote the book 17 Essential Qualities of a Team Player that we went through.
I knew I recognized the name, but I was like, Maxwell's Equations?
Yeah.
Or the Beatles song? I couldn't. I knew it wasn't that one. I wouldn't imagine that would be a conference talk, at least not over Zoom. It would be physical.
Yeah. So that's really cool. And in really awesome news, Amanda got the job.
Nice.
I know I talked about that a little bit back. I'm still a little fuzzy on all the licensing details and all that stuff, but she's going to be teaching high school this year and going to be taking some courses as part of her licensure. I'm not sure. I think it'll count towards a master's degree for some of it. It's all rather confusing. I've helped her out with the application process because, as Will knows, I've applied to many universities throughout my lifetime.
Yep. Can't really add anything to that. I mean, it's when your significant other is a teacher, just the amount of stuff, the amount of paperwork that is normal in that profession just boggles my mind. I don't know how they put up with that and stay sane. Like a tenth as much would drive me right over the edge.
Oh yeah. And getting a straight answer about stuff, because you got the local level and then like the county level and then the state level
and then the union
national level. Yeah. And like, it's all sorts of craziness that I just was like, all right, I'll
and federal law in the mix. And yeah,
I'll take you out for wings and beer to help you relax and we'll be good.
Yeah. That's basically what your function is in that situation. It's not to fix things.
Yeah.
So guys, take your financial confidence to the next level.
Lucas Casares is a fee-only certified financial planner and financial coach serving tech professionals with his company Level Up Financial Planning virtually out of Fort Collins, Colorado.
Level Up Financial Planning changes the financial planning game by empowering you to live your best life, regardless of whether you are just starting up and need to build your financial foundation or mid-career and navigating complex and competing goals.
Yeah. And what's best of all, Lucas and Level Up Financial Planning is a fiduciary for his clients. And this requires him to act in his client's best interest. He is not a salesman. A lot of financial planners, their primary role is to sell you different things. That is not Lucas at all. He's a really great guy. Will and I spent some time getting to know him before we started doing these ads for him. But with him, you only pay as long as you are getting value, and you stop paying when you're no longer getting value from it.
Yeah, and if you want some free samples of the kind of value you can get, he's got a lot of resources available at levelupfinancialplanning.com. So go check those out.
Logical fallacies are errors in reasoning that can invalidate an otherwise good discussion or formal argument or debate. A formal fallacy is an error in the form in which you present your argument. You may be correct in what you are saying, but it may be out of order and just sounds like nonsense. Whereas an informal fallacy is an error in what you're actually saying. The structure may be correct and it may sound correct, but the actual content of the message doesn't make sense.
Logical fallacies can fall into one of four categories. These would be fallacies of relevance, fallacies of omission, fallacies of ambiguity, and component fallacies. Fallacies of relevance have to do with examples or appeals to evidence or people who are not relevant to the argument. Fallacies of omission are due to important or necessary information being left out of an argument. Fallacies of ambiguity happen when the meaning of words or phrases change throughout the discussion.
And component fallacies, because I forgot to type this one out.
You missed a component. Sorry about that. You omitted a component. So which fallacy is that?
Component fallacies have to do with the pieces of the argument. So the structure and how it's set up, where your premise is not a given or something like that. Oh, what we're going to do here, when I started working on this outline, my idea was to grab a few from each category. But as I got into it, I realized, there are a lot of logical fallacies out there. Like, I forgot, but there is an entire college course on them. So we're going to start somewhat of a series, basically a couple of episodes, talking about the different groups of fallacies. They're not going to be sequential. We'll just go through one or two groups at a time, but we will get through all four groups of fallacies by the end of the year. In this episode, we'll be discussing several of the common logical fallacies of relevance that you might run into when you're interacting with others. For each one, we'll describe the fallacy, talk about how to recognize it in a conversation, and finally, some tips on how to overcome that fallacy.
So, this group of fallacies have to do with using examples that are not relevant to the argument or appealing to evidence that are not associated with the premises or with the conclusion.
Yeah. And so I've labeled each one based on their Latin name, except for the very last one, which does not have a Latin name. So when we read these out, the first thing we're going to do is tell you what the translation or the more common name for it is. The first one being argumentum ad baculum.
Right. And this is more commonly known as the appeal to force or the might makes right fallacy.
Yeah. In this fallacy, the argument uses some sort of threat or some sort of actual violence or force to coerce the other party into accepting a certain conclusion.
Yeah, and this threat doesn't have to be of a physical nature. It could include financial or professional consequences, such as threatening someone with the loss of a job or poor grades if they don't agree with you.
Yeah, some examples I read of this when I was working on the outline. An argumentum ad baculum fallacy would be if a professor says, you have to agree with me on these political statements in order to get a good grade in this class. Whereas a professor saying you have to meet certain requirements, like writing so many papers or something like that, to get a good grade in this class would not be a fallacy.
You know, this one's really tough to overcome because typically the person using this fallacy has power, right? They have authority, they have something you want. So you either have to call their bluff or appeal to a higher authority, right? Like force is always an escalating thing. Mm-hmm. Once you start using it, you've got to use more of it. It's basically like XML.
Yeah. I mean, this could be something to where you have a manager who is trying to get you to do something unethical and says that if you won't, that they'll let you go and find someone else who will.
Right. And so you got to go to their manager. And if they don't have a manager, you maybe have to go to the authorities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, there's not a simple solution here. You're either going to call their bluff on it, or you got to, or move up or move on. I mean, the other option too is just to walk away from this.
Yeah. I mean, at the point where this argument comes out, there is no longer an actual discussion being had, right? It's just threat of force. You respond like you would to a threat of force because that's what's there.
Yeah.
So the next one is argumentum ad verecundium.
Yeah. The literal translation of this means argument from that which is improper.
So I can think of a very, very good, Mama Says.
Yeah.
Right. This is the college kid that, what was the movie about, the kid that was talking about foosball? My brain's not working today.
It was an Adam Sandler movie, Waterboy.
Yeah. Was that Waterboy?
That was Waterboy. Yeah.
They kind of blur a little bit, but the way he was in.
It was about why alligators are so ornery.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that now. All the Karens are mad because all the stores are closed and they don't have any managers to talk to. Like that. That's that's not really an argument from anything.
So this is, and I specifically put this one as the second one because one of the solutions to the previous one is to appeal to a higher authority. This one is known as appeal to an improper authority.
Right. So this one essentially attempts to use existing respect or positive feelings for a person and set them up as an authority on a subject based solely on that.
Yeah. So this is like getting medical advice from a celebrity. I know that's a hot topic these days.
Yeah. Let's
but it really
Yeah.
is, because they are not medical professionals. They did, like, some of them may have studied it. I do believe there are some celebrities who, before they became famous, were medics and nurses and stuff like that. But in general, that is not their area of expertise.
Right. And even if they studied it before, that knowledge rots. Right. Like,
Yeah.
so, yeah, this is actually very, very common. You're going to see this pretty much any political debate that is out there, any widespread discussion of basically anything. I've seen people use this to say, well, so and so is a programmer and he uses Vim all the time. And he says that Emacs will cause you repetitive strain injury. Okay. Does he know any parts of his lower arm other than hand and fingers? Like,
Yeah.
But you'll see these discussions all the time. It's very common. Now, appealing to an authority is not always a fallacy. It's when that person is not an authority on the subject, or when you rely too heavily on the opinion of a few people.
Yeah. So your example of the developer who always uses Vim. Now, if you appeal to their authority on keyboard shortcuts,
well, they know,
they will know
they can
what they're talking about.
They can exit that app to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Whereas, like, if you do it in Emacs, your hands get in these positions that look like spiders having a rave. It's awful. But
spiders having a rave.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. Wrestling or something. But that person cannot comment authoritatively on repetitive strain injuries at a population level. Now, they could say, hey, my hands hurt more when I did it this way versus what I'm doing now.
Yeah, right. That's different. Another thing too is when you rely too heavily on the opinions of one or just a few people.
Right.
So you don't diversify that authority. Now, it may be a very, very niche thing where that person may be such an authority, like, you're going to talk Linux, you're going to talk, Linus is the authority.
Right. But that said, if you go in and you talk to 5 or 10 other people who are very prominent with the kernel stuff, you're going to learn a lot more. And it may be a thing where you didn't understand the words that came out of his mouth and the way he meant you to understand them too, right? Like, there's also the communication problem. It's not even necessarily an authority thing. It's just,
and that's the thing. That's why this is a fallacy. The other thing too is there may be assumptions made about understanding from one or just a select group of people. Whereas if you diversify that group of authority, they will have different levels of assuming your knowledge base.
Right.
Now, a sub fallacy of this is an appeal to biased authority. And this happens when the person is an authority, but they may have some reason to be biased about a certain view. This is why when you go to conference talks, a lot of times the speakers will say at the beginning, hey, this is where I work. This is biases that I may have on this subject.
Right. And, the appeal to a biased authority really kind of can weaken your position, right? Like, if you are using that, the person disagreeing with you can just point at that instead of actually refuting your point. So you're basically creating a vulnerability for yourself if you do this, provided that they understand enough to catch you.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah. To address this fallacy, ask for credentials on why that person is an authority on that subject. Now, I will say one thing I see with the addressing of this is sometimes people will also use credentials in a way that's not appropriate. Right. Especially for things that are subjective. And they'll go, well, these people over here feel this way, but this person with credentials says they don't. Well, it's like, are you asking those people or are you asking the person with credentials?
Well, see, then they would not be an authority on that subject.
Right. It would be an improper authority, but you got to kind of look at the shadings of this a little bit. And
well, that's why you have to look at the credentials and go, are they actually an authority here? Right. That's the thing. That's why you ask for those credentials when someone says, oh, this authority figure or this person says it. Like, all right, well, why are they an authority? Like, right. What makes them an authority on this?
Yeah. And in this particular instance in a case where something is subjective or something, there's an exception to the rule, and you're appealing to the authority, going, "Hey, they wrote this thing." In general, Linux is a better operating system, but in this one case where, hey, I'm doing heavy video gaming or something, maybe not.
Mm-hmm. Now, another thing too you have to consider with this is what they're speaking on. So, for example, I have suffered from irritable bowel syndrome for quite some time. I can speak to how that makes me feel. I am an expert on, I'm an authority on my experience with that and what I've gone through. I'm not as much of an authority on the physiological and the biological things. I have quite a bit more knowledge than most people, just because of my medical background. I realized that as I started saying it, but I am not an authority figure on internal medicine.
Right. And your approach to it was more, hey, I'm trying to troubleshoot a problem that I have. Once you solved it, you're like, hey, here's how I troubleshot the problem. If somebody said, oh, but where's your research based evidence and credentials? It's like, but this is how I solved the problem. Like that isn't,
And if someone were to say, well, Beach said this, so we should do it. It's, well, why should we do it? Because Beach said it. It's like, well, he has the problem. He dealt with it, not because he knows about it. He's got, not because of a medical degree or research in the field. It's just, hey, this is what worked for him. And it's, so you have to look at, all right, what are they being used as an authority on?
And what are the consequences is the other thing, right?
Yeah.
Because I can try something that worked for you, and if it's low risk to try it out to see if it works for me, that's good enough for for individuals, right? Like you don't make global policy on that and go, oh well, we got to be careful about distributing onions because it causes problems for some people. It's like, no, but if it is causing you problems, then Beej's story is probably useful.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And it's just sort of like I would suggest anyone having having GI issues to keep a food journal, because that's how I figured out my trigger foods, but I wouldn't suggest, oh, hey, go take this medication that I'm taking for it. Because one, I'm not a doctor, and that's illegal, practicing medicine without a license and all that jazz. But also,
at least somewhat.
Yeah. But also, I'm not an expert in that aspect of it.
Right.
So you have to look at that too. So the next fallacy that we're going to discuss is argumentum ad populum.
Yeah, this is also known as the bandwagon fallacy. Translated, this means argument to the people, which sounds like it would be on like some Soviet era propaganda poster. But so it's just a strange phrasing.
It's a literal translation from Latin.
Right. But basically this is all the cool kids are doing it. Now, thankfully we never have this problem in tech. Ever.
Because there are no cool kids.
Yeah. Well, there's that. It's a null set.
Sorry,
we can't make any assertions on it. Done. So it's not a problem, right? It's null propagation. It's not a thing.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, basically, in this fallacy, an argument is assumed to be correct because a large portion of other people agree with it.
Right.
It's the statement, well, hey, everybody is switching over to doing Scrum, so we should.
Right. And there's another variant here that's they call it the patriotic variation, which states that a belief is true because it's somehow more patriotic than its opposition. You saw this a lot on TV in the early 2000s, right? Like that was pretty common. You're going to be seeing it a lot probably for the next, basically till you're dead.
Seeing it a lot in social media right now.
Oh yeah.
About a lot of stuff that's going on, not just, a lot of stuff here in the United States, but just across the globe, in various places. It's interesting. If you look for it, you will see where this kind of appeal to patriotism
Yeah,
in a way.
and it's not just like country level patriotism either, right? Like
Mhm.
it can be ideals, it can be this is better for open source, so therefore it's better. This is better for the children or whatever, so it's better.
Mhm.
Without considering other costs and risks and everything else that are going on.
Another variant is the snob, which asserts that one is better or in a group of betters by accepting the argument. So the phrase all intellectuals would agree implies that by not agreeing with the argument, you are not an intellectual or you are not intelligent.
Right. And the fact is everybody's agreeing, nobody's thinking.
Right.
And that's true of just about everything, right? There's very few things that are just, I can't understand how somebody would think the opposite based on the evidence, but there's usually going to be some degree of disagreement, variance in opinion, something.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times the snobbish things are this is better because this is the way that smart people think, or this is the way that that compassionate people think, or whatever your chosen weasel word of the day is for a better person.
Yeah. And it's kind of this attitude that you are not as good as other people if you don't agree with this.
Right. Yeah. And this is an emotional play, and it really has to be called out very quickly because really popular opinions can turn out to be incorrect or massively destructive given time. Popularity is not an indicator of truth. The 1932 German election.
Yeah, all right, well, that's true. I was actually going to say, the popular belief was that the Earth was flat and the center of the solar system for a very long time.
Now, see, what's going to happen is one of these flat Earth people is going to kidnap you or drive you to the edge and chuck you over. Now, I'm just telling you.
That's fine. I'll enjoy the free fall.
You've even got the soundtrack for that, right? You got a
Oh
Tom
yeah,
Petty
yeah,
song.
yeah. Hey, just if you're gonna do that, at least let me bring my guitar so I can play free falling as I'm falling
endlessly in vacuum. Yeah, now you've got the flat earthers after us, man. That's man, I just don't even know what to say about that. So the next one is argumentum ad traditionem.
This is also known as argumentum ad antiquatum. I hope I pronounced that right. It's a really odd word.
I'm pretty sure I heard that word on the Passion of the Christ. We'll go with that.
Cool. This is basically an appeal to tradition. And in this, the premise of the argument is considered to be true because people have always believed it to be true.
Yeah, and you're going to see this at work in the form of, well, it's always worked this way, so we should keep it the same. Or if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Mm-hmm.
I ran into this discussing remote work with a lot of people last year.
Isn't there a book about that?
Yeah, but during those discussions, oh, well, that won't work. We've always done it this other way, right? We've always had everybody come into the office, and there's no reason to fix it. Well, turns out you got a reason, and now you got to deal with it anyway. If you'd have been smart and tried different ideas, you wouldn't have this problem right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I look at what we did at church with the streaming. When I started on the tech team there last year, I mentioned, I was like, hey, we've got the equipment. We could do some podcasting and some streaming stuff. And like, they did not make this argument. What I was told was that we've actually been thinking about that, but we didn't really have anyone who knew about it. And it's like, well,
now that you've put your foot in it,
yeah, like
keep walking.
I've done some, and so they started looking into it before, like a year before all this stuff happened.
Yeah,
and so that when it did, it wasn't oh my goodness, we got to figure this out. It was, hey, we've been looking into this, and this is what equipment we have. This is how we can use it. This is what we need to get, and we were able to very quickly, like within a matter of 2 weeks from when we were like, we're meeting this week and we're going to start looking at, all right, what happens if they tell us we can't meet, to the very next week we couldn't meet and we were streaming.
Yeah.
And but it was because they had already been thinking that way when it got brought up. They didn't take hey, we've always done this. Literally at the conference I was at today, one of the sessions was about this very attitude, this appeal to tradition. It was, hey, you have to look at your systems and go, are they working? Because sometimes we can fall in love with a system because we know it, we've always done it, and that is not the way to be. That's not the way to be effective.
Yeah, and this looks like common sense, but what happens here is that, the old solution looks like common sense too to the people that are in that headspace. And so they don't typically address the question of, is there a better way? Has some other opportunity presented itself or another problem?
Yeah. The attitude of it's always worked this way seems like common sense until you have a global pandemic.
Yeah. And then nothing's
and
common
you have
sense.
to think of new ways. Yeah.
Yeah. But, overcoming tradition is very difficult. And it requires a lot more evidence than you might think you need. There's a reason traditions have survived in many cases as long as they have, right? Then you've got to provide evidence that somewhat overcomes that or shows a better way, right? Like you can't just go around removing Chesterton's fence, right? So you're going to have to come prepared if you're dealing with people that are in this headspace, essentially.
Yeah.
And you also have to be patient, right? Like you can't go, hey, we're going to change all this today. Mm-hmm. People have to grow into things. There's sometimes even ideas that a lot of people agree with. You can't get them to implement those ideas very quickly because they're uncomfortable, even if they agree with them, maybe especially if they agree with it, because they're worried that they're wrong and that they'll champion some idea that you pushed and, it'll be the thing. And then when it blows up, they get blamed.
Yeah. And this can be very frustrating, especially if you are someone like myself who sees potential and sees possibilities all the time. Like I'm constantly having to fight off the frustration of I see something, I'm like, this would be a great idea. I present it and get turned down only for, weeks, months, years later, it to be adopted. Yeah. And I'm like, I had this idea weeks ago. I had this idea years ago and you didn't do it, but now you're doing it.
Yep.
And it's just, it can be very frustrating, but what has to happen is, and I've had this happen with Will, you gotta present the idea and let him stew on it for a bit, like the idea of podcasting.
Yeah. How long did that take? 6 months?
About so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't something I wanted to do initially. Obviously that's changed.
Yeah.
Because I think we would know if it hadn't.
But Will's attitude was not he didn't have this appeal to tradition. He was just not in a headspace ready to do that. And so I presented the idea and had to let him stew on it. And
other things had to get in line too, right? Because my job situation was kind of uncertain around then. And, I had to get to a more stable position on a lot of things or get to where it was looking like it was going to get more stable.
Yeah. I can't think of the exact right term, but a friend of ours calls it planting mental time bombs, where you plant an idea, in someone's head, and then, you maybe feed it a little bit, but you don't harp on it. You sort of let it grow until it's like it's grown. I guess the movie Inception was kind of about that idea. I mean, if you like really boil it down and, get through all the confusing dream within a dream within a dream stuff, then yeah, I think Rick and Morty did it better.
I haven't seen either.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Well, there's that. So on that, the next fallacy we're going to discuss is argumentum ad misericordiam. I think I pronounced that right.
Yeah, this is an appeal to emotion, or translated as the argument from pity or argument to compassion.
Yeah, emotions can be used to motivate or to rile up people, but it's not a premise or a support for a logical argument. So, like in rhetoric, emotion is very, very heavily used in in writing, in like getting emotion in music and poetry. Emotion is very, very important and a very key element to those things. In logical debate, logical arguments, emotion is not like the emotional state of someone or how it makes you feel is not a premise or a support for a logical argument.
Right. Because a lot of times it's used to push an idea that is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, it's absolutely miserable that people die. Right. You know, their families are standing around crying around the casket. Don't you think we should stop people dying? I mean, look at all the misery you could end if you did that. But like, that's not possible. But don't you think we should for the children? Right. Like that's the sort of, and it's usually not quite that bad, but I've seen a lot of stuff where somebody talks about what should happen and the thing that should happen is actually not possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, like physics is in the way.
Yeah. I mean, there's actually a few movies and stories I've read that address what would happen if people stopped dying.
Yeah.
There's a whole season of Torchwood about it. Miracle Day was the name of that season. Very interesting.
What was there was a story we had to read. Tuck Everlasting.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but you'll see this a lot. I mean, you know, an emotional state is important as far as personal stuff, right? Like you can't be like a doctor Mayo writing a prescription for everything in your life, right? Emotions matter, but they're not logic, and they don't get you to a solution in a lot of things, especially the kind of things you deal with day to day in code.
Well, they're not relevant in discerning the truth or falsity of an argument. You know, no, it's, let's say, and I'm going to use Amanda as an example here. So heads up, Amanda, I know you're listening, but this is not a real
That's an argumentum ad Lord help him. Because of the Latin word for that.
Yeah. I mean, let's say Amanda and I have an argument. And, you know, something is said that, you know, hurts my feelings. Or something is done that hurts my feelings. So you notice how it's my feelings getting hurt because I don't want, you know, my physical body to get hurt.
Right. You know, so she points out that you have split ends.
There you go. Which I actually kind of do right now. I need to go to the.
Yeah. Land the plane.
So anyway, at that point, me stating how I feel, because it's an interpersonal situation. This goes back to, you know, communication training, the I feel statements. You know, I feel this way when this happens. That is relevant in a interpersonal situation. However, in an argument or when you're trying to prove something is like the best way of doing a thing, or when you're trying to prove that you should be allowed to work remote 3 days a week, talking about how it makes you feel is not a good argument.
Right. Oh man, I don't even want to get on that tangent.
That said, though, coming around to it, you can say how it will improve morale, because that is a measurable thing.
Yeah, I think the trick here is realizing when your feelings are signal versus when they're noise, based on the communication channel.
Yeah. Now, when this does come up, like the previous fallacy, appeals to emotion have to be called out directly for what they are. You know, you just have to say, hey, this is not relevant to the conversation. This is, you know, this is trying to get people riled up, trying to get me riled up about the situation. And it takes a lot of self-awareness to realize you're getting riled up, because like someone who's good at this can make it sound like a valid argument and get you riled up and get you going off, and then go, you know, derail the whole argument, because even if you are right, if you get riled up about something they said, then you've lost the argument anyway.
Right. And speaking of people getting riled up, the next one is argumentum ad hominem.
The personal attack, or a better way of putting it, poisoning the well fallacy. And it literally translates edit, and it literally translates as argument toward the man.
Yeah, this is an insult disguised as evidence for an argument. Somebody makes an assertion that the sky is blue. You look at them and you go, dude, you can't even draw. You're not an artist. You're not qualified to say that that's blue.
Yeah.
It's an attack versus no, it isn't. Blue is, between these two shades. Of course, once you get into color theory, that's probably not the best example, right? Because we looked into doing a show outline on that, and it's like, yeah, that's going to be a minute.
Yeah. Color theory. Oh my goodness. Can't believe you brought that up in a logical fallacy.
I know. It sounded great when I started. It was just sort of like, honestly, you could use this as an ad hominem for me for explaining ad hominems, right? Like it could be like a recursive ad hominem. It's like, you can't explain ad hominem because you use color theory to explain ad hominem.
Yeah, there you go. Throw in some recursion there. That's awesome. That's
how you fix everything, right?
Yeah, sure. Right. Another thing could be, you could be in a meeting and, a planning meeting even. Let's say you're doing sprints, and you're in a sprint planning meeting and someone suggests something and the response is, well, you're a QA, you don't know anything about API development, so what you said, is completely irrelevant. Or we don't have to listen to you, or that's a dumb idea because you don't know what you're talking about being a QA. And it's like, that doesn't mean it's not a good idea. I've gotten a lot of really great ideas from suggestions of non-technical people in meetings.
And I have too, and not even in meetings.
Yeah.
Sometimes somebody will say something random to me and I'm like, oh crap, and it flips a light on. You got to be open to potentially getting information from sources that are unconventional if the information is correct or useful.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing too here is they may not know what they're talking about. Literally, I have had managers and QA people and BAs and
developers.
Well, there's some of those, but I've had people, non-technical people, say, well, hey, can we just do it this way, or can we do this? And you have to explain why. Saying, hey, you're not a developer, you wouldn't understand. That's an ad hominem. That's attacking them for not having that knowledge. That
right
is not. That's not a good way to win an argument, because what's going to happen is, especially if it's someone in management, they're just going to go find someone who can. And
they're going to appeal to power.
Yeah. Right. Appeal to real power because they have it. Yeah. And they'll go find someone who can do it, or who will explain to them why it's a bad idea or why they shouldn't. A lot of times, if they're not a good manager, they'll go find someone who will do it, even though it's a bad idea. And I've seen that happen before. Thankfully, not where I work, but in places where I've done some consulting in the past. Now, what you have to watch out for here is that it's real easy to fall into this without even realizing it. Because, the person doesn't know what they're talking about. But saying that is an insult. Explaining to them, hey, that I see where you're going with it. Here's why that wouldn't work out. That actually addresses, like, that actually attacks their statement, what they said, and doesn't attack them. And it shows them respect, even if they're not management, and you don't have to show them respect. I think you should respect everyone, but
yeah, it just keeps the communication channel open too, so that it can continue to be a discussion, not a fight.
Yeah. And that's the big thing here. Now, there's a subcategory here. I think it's tu quoque. I
think it's to coke, isn't it? It's one of those Latin words that's sort of like a lot of French words, in that every letter after the first one is a suggestion. I mean, you think about like the word Q, right? Like every letter after the first one is silent. It's one of those. Anyway, it's a you also fallacy. So the idea here is, you're attacking the person making the argument instead of the argument itself. So it'd be, for instance, hey, this company, trashes the ocean. Well, I saw you throw a cup out your window yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of, well, you did it too.
Oh.
It's playground tactics.
Or if, say, like, I said, hey, I don't think Will is the best choice for managing this project because it's a high profile project and he doesn't have a lot of project management experience. And instead of him coming up with why he should, his response is, well, neither should Beach because Beach doesn't have any project management experience. It's like,
no, see, and that's not what I would do though, right? Because I would be like, hey, Beach, you go do that. That's a good idea. Yeah.
I know that's not what you would do. I'm using this as an example.
Because I totally would. Like, I don't want to manage a prominent project. No,
that's why I used you as an example. Is because I knew you.
I would ad hominem myself out of that one. And then you would have to like do the reverse ad hominem. Well, I'm terrible too.
Yeah. But no, the thing is, when someone makes a valid argument against you, like not an attack, but just like that, where it's like, oh, hey, you're not a very good fit for this position for these reasons. And instead of going, oh, well, here's why I am, you come back with, well, neither are you. It's the, oh, you're trying to take this away from me attitude instead of the, hey, let me show you why I am the right choice.
Right.
Kind of thing. Now, when personal attacks come out, the logical side of the argument or discussion is over. I mean, it's no longer a debate. It's no longer a logical argument. It's an attack. It can escalate to a yelling match or worse. And at this point, it's best to just walk away.
Right. And then the last one is argument from personal incredulity. There's not really a fancy Latin name for this one. Basically, you're saying, I don't understand it, so it must be wrong. Fallacy. We'll call it the Julius Caesar fallacy. No, I can go to the Senate today. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Personal incredulity is the assertion that the argument is false because you don't understand the argument or the evidence behind it.
Right. And this fallacy is commonly used to invalidate evidence by stating that it can't be used to support the argument because the person doesn't understand it. And that would be the target doesn't understand it.
Yeah. I mean, this would be like management saying, no, we can't try out Agile because it doesn't make any sense. It just, we can't do that because it's nonsense.
Right. Another, possibly better example, if you look at Galileo and some of them, the arguments they were making for the motion of planets and the like, it didn't make sense to the people in charge at that point. And so they're like, oh, this is garbage because we don't understand it.
Oh, I see how it is. I pull out relevant in our lifetime examples, and you got to be all like, I am so smart, I am going to pull out the scientific history example.
Well, I didn't want to defend Agile necessarily.
I couldn't help it, man. That was just
the way it is now.
You're just like, a better example would be.
I just couldn't. I was like, I didn't want to go along with the necessarily defending Agile because a lot of times it doesn't make sense even to people that understand it, at least as implemented, right?
Sorry, I couldn't.
Yeah, whether a person understands something is not relevant to the truth of the thing. However, convincing them of it may require a really patient explanation of how the thing works.
Yeah.
And you can look on any conspiracy theory thing on the internet and you'll see this everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this is literally the concept of what you believe doesn't change the truth of the matter.
Yeah. And what you can comprehend doesn't.
It's very similar to the appeal to tradition, where you just have to be patient and walk through it if they don't get it. And this is a key thing. If they don't get it, don't continue to repeat the same thing. I have to watch myself on this because sometimes I'm talking to people and I'm talking to other developers who just are not getting what I'm saying. And I'm like, I don't know how I could lay this out more plainly to you. Like, I have told you the exact line of code where the problem lies. What more do you want from me?
Yeah, I think part of the issue sometimes is just you've got to realize that if they're not getting it, you either have a problem with the communication channel or you have a problem with the receiver. of the communication or with you, right? Like there's 3 parts and you got to diagnose which one it is, not send the same signal.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a key thing. And that takes patience and that takes a lot of self-awareness, because you're like, it makes perfect sense to me. And you ask someone else and they're like, well, yeah, what you said makes perfect sense. I don't know why they don't get it. It's, it's on them. But the thing is, you as the communicator, it may be their problem as why they're not getting it, but you as the communicator, it's on you to make it so that they can understand it.
Well, I mean, you and I do this all the time, right? Like one of us will get stuck and they'll message the other one going, hey, I'm having this problem. I explained it like this. They don't get it. Am I being dense the way I'm explaining it, or are they being dense, or should I use different words? Like, is there some, because you kind of have to have almost a sanity check on the way you're explaining things with this so you can figure out what's going on. And you as a participant in that system of communication don't know enough to debug the system because you're part of it. You're going to run into logical fallacies all the time, especially in informal conversations with friends or on social media or in business, just, all over the place. It's important to understand that fallacies are faults in the logic of an argument. Because what someone says contains fallacies, that doesn't mean that they're not correct, right? Like this isn't a get out of truth free card. It just means that their particular argument that they used to express that did not prove them correct. Keep that in mind and be lenient on those who may commit those fallacies. Use the knowledge here to better your own use of logic when you're arguing your point.
So we want to thank Lucas again from Level Up Financial Planning for sponsoring this week's episode. Through his sponsorship, Lucas is helping Will and I to achieve our podcasting goals, just like he'll help you achieve your financial goals. That pretty much wraps us up. What do you have for us this week for Tricks of the Trade?
Well, I've noticed something in recent months, I guess. And a lot of this is due to COVID. A lot of it's due to finishing up my second book. And that's that goals have value. And if you don't really have something that you're actively working towards, it really takes the edge off your ability to work your way through life. And I've kind of refocused on a lot of stuff here lately. And I've noticed a pretty profound shift in my mood as a result of that. And so I know a lot of people with all the dumpster fire that COVID has created, among other things, because like here we had the tornado, we had COVID, and then we had the Derecho or whatever the straight line winds that broke a bunch of stuff. And then we've had, civil unrest, and we've had, I forget what the other things were. When you're in these kind of situations, it helps to have something that you're working towards versus just bouncing around as a result of everything going on. It's, a ship is more stable on the sea when it's sailing versus when it's sitting still in a storm. And so I just want to suggest that everybody really, really try very hard to figure out what you're actually going for and then start going that way, especially if you're starting to feel a little bit down with everything going on, because I really think it'll help. And that's all I got.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment, please email us at neckbeards@CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed through Creative Commons.
The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up for weekly emails with extra tips and insights, be sure to check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with news about the show. Catch us each week as we broadcast live, talking about what's going on in the tech world and answering listener questions.
Learn more about all of our shows and groups by going to CompleteDeveloperNetwork.com, where you'll find links to Junior Developer Toolbox, Developer Launchpad, and our other communities. Thanks for listening. See you next time.